name's Hannah Thorpe. I come from an agency called Found. My job is to be a business director, which basically means to identify new things and to work out the best way to meet our clients' needs. When Jason asked me to come and talk, I really wanted to talk to you about what the future of SEO was. I started working on it, and I realized there's just way too much. And that one person alone could definitely, in a 30, maybe 40-minute session, who knows how long this is, cover the whole future of search. So then I was like, right, I'm just going to tell you about the present. I'll tell you what I think is going on in SEO now. And then I realized I'm not really sure, because there's so much changing so often. So I thought I'd start with a story instead. So once upon a time, I thought that brand was a ranking factor. And I went to loads of conferences and I told everyone that brand was the thing. And you had to build your brand if you expected to rank at all. And my logic was that we know that Google's algorithm is using machine learning. And machine learning has helped them to understand synonyms. So their synonym recognition's been going since 2006, maybe? But the point being, it's something they've really refined. And then I was like, so what if we just stop thinking about brands like humans and think about brands like robots? And that would mean that brand is just another keyword. So I don't know if this translates, but all of these brands are fairly synonymous. So you might say you're going to Google something when you actually Bing it, that kind of thing. The brand name has become interchangeable for all of those products. And so I guess you could call it maybe a type of super synonym, because it's something that has become so widely known and widely accepted as just meaning the same, even though it was just purely a brand name. And then that made me think that it's not your brand. It's not whether you invested in offline marketing in order to build your brand. It's actually the way that your brand is searched for, the way that it's spoken about, and the way that it's linked to that is a ranking factor. Which kind of put me back to like SEO when I first started, where links were the only thing that mattered. So it becomes a little bit more confusing as to really how this relates to brand. So that's kind of where I was at, and then we hit November last year, and Google had its 19th, 20th birthday, and they started talking about this thing called neural matching. For those of you that don't know what neural matching is, it's basically when you don't know the word for something. So if you search, I don't know if that's too small, at the top, the search is, why does my TV look strange? If you search that, Google knows that what you actually mean is, what is the soap opera effect and how do I fix it? So you'll see in the results that it just immediately defaults to telling you about the soap opera effect. It doesn't even try and diagnose the problem with your TV. It knows that for us, most people who say TV looks strange clearly mean that. It's actually when your TV goes fuzzy and it looks like you're watching those like really old Spanish soap operas. That's the principle behind it. And now Google say that about 30% of all queries utilize neural matching, where they know the word that you mean without you having to use it. It's a way that Google is giving users what they want and giving them the answers they want without them knowing the question. If you're optimizing in terms of SEO, though, that's quite hard. Google's giving people an answer, and you're not. Great. So maybe it's not the brand that's making people rank. Maybe instead it's the impact that brand has on building relevance and authority. Because if someone searches for, say, I don't know, like, what's that thing I sit on? And you happen to be a really popular chair company, and you're the one that Google you become the default in, that's a brand thing, but it's really to do with your relevance and your authority. So I kind of had this theory, and everyone calls it different things. I know Jason calls it an answer engine. I kind of default towards calling Google a discovery engine. So I thought I'd take a little bit of time to explain why, and then how we optimize for a discovery engine based on that. Okay, so very literally, in the case of the Google feed, they kind of renamed it like Google Discovery. So that's quite an obvious way that they are doing this. And with this, they're pushing information out to users. So we've started seeing this in the UK now. It's been in the US for a while. But when you're actually on your mobile on search, it starts giving you results you might be interested in before you've even performed a search. So it's pushing the information rather than the user querying something. So if you want to rank here, you can't have optimized for a keyword. You can't have built a link based on that anchor text. That's not going to work because Google is simply pushing it out before the user types the word. And then obviously there is the topic layer, which Google's been talking about a lot more recently. And for that, it's really about there being a single search, but Google guiding you into clicking through and seeing more information without typing another query. So again, we've seen Google eliminate the queries here. These examples come from like Google's own announcements about it. And they say that it sits above the knowledge graph, so it's connecting the dots. If you can't see this that well, what you'll see is that it's two different dog breeds, but the cards and the tabs on the cards are different because they're so hyper targeted towards that particular dog breed. So people that look at pugs, they actually look at famous pugs more than you look at a famous Yorkshire Terrier because they're looking for the pug from Men in Black. Whereas if you're looking at Yorkshire Terriers, you care more about how to groom them because you're probably having an issue with your Yorkshire Terrier. And that's why it's split up like that. And it's to do with what's the most relevant next query that Google's expecting. So again, they're giving the user what they think the user wants before the user has to ask for it. Similar with activity cards, so that's really just hyper-personalization in the SERPs. It's going to store your previous pages, previous queries, and it works really well for long research journeys. It also works really well for Google because it's going to make you want to stay signed in on multiple devices as you get used to it. Because if you can search on your desktop and then pick that search up on your mobile really easily, there's a reason for you to stop browsing in incognito in your mobile and instead to stay signed in to every device at every moment in time. And that's going to give Google a much clearer picture of exactly how you could qualify through the kind of multiple device attribution problems that people have. And then I think I've heard every English talk at this conference mention entities. Cindy covered this really well yesterday. I think the simplest thing to think about as entity as a ranking factor is to think of it as a word that's going to mean everything to someone else, no matter what language you're putting it in. So an entity can be a domain, but it can also not be a domain and can be above that level. So someone like Katy Perry, she is an entity, but then she has the sub-entities of her website, her Ticketmaster, when her conference dates are, her concert, she doesn't speak at conferences, dates are, all of that sort of thing. So if you're only optimizing your website, you're only optimizing your sub-entity, because you've not optimized for Katy Perry if you're just optimizing katyperry.com. Does that make sense? Cool. So in terms of entity optimization, go and watch Cindy's talk, but you'll get a lot more advice on how to do that too. Ooh. I was warned about this clicker as well, and yet I still can't work it. I have the opposite problem, where it just clicks too fast. Okay, so that means that our standard methods don't work. Because if we're just optimizing by putting some keywords on the page, building a nice site structure, getting some internal links, that doesn't solve for Google pushing out answers, and it doesn't solve for entity recognition stuff. And we know this because standard SEO tools struggle to predict more than 15% of rankings. So that's things like Moz, where they tell you what your domain authority is and go, this means you'll rank here. They're really good at 1 to 3. 1 to 10 they're okay at. Anything position 11 plus, they're just yeah, no idea. So most of our tools that we're using, if we're actually not ranking that well for the term, they're not that useful to us. And then we obviously have to factor this in. This number changes all the time. But the most commonly shouted about one is that 34% of searches don't actually result in a click. And that's because the person's either getting the answer in the SERP, they're searching on mobile, that sort of thing. And then there's the whole March update. Everyone says something different happened, so I think we can safely say no one has any idea. Not proof of what has happened in that update, because so many different things happened at once. And actually, now that we see core updates happening, we can very rarely diagnose what the true element that changed was, and it's very rare that Google's going to tell us that information anymore. It's no longer as simple as this update was links, this update was content. Because I'm actually thinking that we're seeing updates that are more like relevancy, and relevancy involves all of those things. So then I got really confused, And I was like, let's go back a step. What are we trying to do in SEO? And in SEO, all you see is people talking about algorithms, people talking about ranking factors. There we go. So then I was like, well, what's an algorithm? Like, why are we so focused on this? And an algorithm has a couple of key bits in the definition. And one of them being that you have to have a list of rules to follow in order. And the definition actually tells you twice that everything has to be in the right order. And I was like, well, for SEO now, nothing has to be in the right order. So I started in SEO about 6 years ago. And when I did, I was told, like, fix your technical integrity, make a blog post, get some links, you'll rank. But now, actually, I can have terrible technical integrity, but I might have a load of links and my site will still rank. I wouldn't recommend it, but that is possible. And there's so many ways you can flip that order. So if you can flip that order, then we're actually probably not optimizing for an algorithm, and we should probably stop fixating on it because we've simplified what Google does. So I think what we're doing is wasting time by optimizing for a search algorithm instead of optimizing for users discovering content. So I wanted to talk about the difference between search and discovery. So hopefully you've picked up some of these themes throughout already. But for search, domain holds the value, and it's always query-based, and there's a single answer, and you're going to want to do repeated searches. But then when it comes to discovery, it's the entity that holds the value, so that's the biggest switch that we see. And it becomes queryless because Google can push out rather than the user pull the answer to them. And it's a much more fluid journey. Your discovery doesn't end. You never know everything about a topic, so you can always learn more, which means your discovery isn't going to stop. So that traditional purchase funnel that we have, and you go like awareness, consideration, and all of that, and you get down to that action, well, actually, what's next? And what's after that? And then when does it loop back round? That's going to become your discovery journey instead of a pure search. So trying to make it a bit more practical, I was like, right, got to build a brand, got to build some relevancy, got to make sure that we're optimizing for all the things in any order. So I summed it up into 4 things, which is you want to be front of mind, you want to be useful, you want to be better, and you want to be a brand, you want to be known. And so I was like, right, how do I do that? Or no, I wasn't. I then quoted Rand. Lovely. So then I was like, how do you do that? And I was like, cool. So if I didn't have to think about my clients' budgets, I would run a TV campaign, take over every airport, put my brand absolutely everywhere. And was like, right, now I'm going to apply that to my clients. None of them have that sort of money. So I had a little cry and was like, right, can't do it. There's absolutely no way I can do SEO anymore unless they're willing to invest in all of those other things. So I thought, again, back to basics, what does Google say it does? It keeps saying that it really understands you. So if we're optimizing to what Google wants, if we can just show understanding of the user, then we're doing what Google wants. And showing understanding doesn't cost a lot of money, or helping Google to understand you doesn't cost a lot of money. So I've got it down into 4 kind of tactical things that you can do, hopefully when you're back in the office, that are going to help you with this. So moving beyond keywords. Firstly, there's no such thing as an accurate search volume. Everyone knows that everything gets grouped together, there's all the misspellings, it's just not worth trying to look at individual search volumes anymore. So this is an example I stole from Verve Search, but also like Keyword Planner. And you can see all these typos and you have all the same search volume. There's no way the same amount of people misspell the word cheap every single month as that spell it correctly. So I think we can establish this is meaningless. But if I was optimizing for this kind of term, I would think that the demand in my market was close to 12,000 searches, just under. But it's not, is it? Because that would be adding them up, and there's lots of duplication here. So actually, the demand in my market is probably more like 3,000, maybe 4,000 searches. That's a big difference. So if you're focusing on an individual keyword, you're going to find you've got these inflated market sizes. Then you're going to do a forecast, and you're going to be like, I'm going to get 6% click-through rate of everything I rank for. There's 12,000 searches. Great, this is what I'm going to hit. And you can be miles off, because your market is a quarter of the size to what you thought it was. Now, this problem en masse means that all of our forecasting is quite often absolutely nonsense. So instead, I try and get my clients to think about the moment rather than the keyword. For a start, we don't give our clients any individual keyword data. We will give them keyword clusters that we divide by the number of keywords in there to give them a more reasonable volume size. And we also we measure the movement of a cluster rather than one single rank change because it gives us more accurate data anyway. But when you're looking at the moment, think about what your customers are doing and what type of information they need. So one of the things we found is that searches on mobile that happen in the morning are quite often shorter. And we were like, that's so weird. And we're like, hold on, it's just someone on their way to work and they're running around. So we have quite a lot of B2B clients. They're doing some research before they get to the office and they're jumping on the tube, typing really quickly. So yeah, their search is 2 words. Whereas when they're at their office, at their desk, they've got time. So thinking about what they're doing is going to give you a much clearer picture of what they want. And then if you're doing that, you don't have to think about a single keyword. You can just think about, well, where would they be in that moment? So we also put our clusters like this in terms of what is most important. You can really put anything on here. But you take, each color is a different keyword cluster. So if you're optimizing for furniture, you might have one that is 3-person sofa, 2-person sofa, chair. And then you can see what is most important in that cluster that will make it rank, because we find that the clusters will all rank differently. So in some certain areas, outreach and links are more important, and in others, technical. So we create this weighting so that we know how to target each cluster with the best balance of SEO tactics. The reason we do that is because SEO doesn't have to be done in an order, because we're not optimizing for an algorithm. So because it's not in an order, you can do any different variation of the weighting here. Yeah? Cool. I'm going to breathe. Right. Next, simplifying your content. So I try and recommend, and I don't know if you're taught this at French schools, but at English schools, you're taught to structure everything in this way that you write. And then for some reason, we all grew up, got jobs, and stopped doing it. But Google really likes it if you optimize where you make your point, make your examples, and then have your comment. And for me, comment is your brand nonsense, and your bit where you're we really care about the environment, we care about people, lovely, but it's not actually going to help you rank. And then your point is basically your answer box, what should rank. If you structure every piece of writing you do like this, you will find that you actually win answer boxes much quicker and much easier. We ask our members of staff to actually be able to highlight the paragraphs. Well, if you can't highlight your point, your example, your comment, it's not structured well. And then just be really clear when you're simplifying your content in what you put and where. So I hate saying this at conferences with other people who are experts on answer boxes. I have never seen a table answer box appear that has over 5 columns. At the moment, I'm sure there probably is because Google's testing all the time. On that basis, if you're making a table and you need more than 5 columns, make it into 2 separate tables and you're more likely to have it appear. The same for number of rows. So Google does do that extended, you can add more rows now, but that's much less common than if it will only show 5 or 6 rows. So you can do a shortened version of your table and then a longer version lower down the page. But your main point would be this short and abbreviated version. So it's just keeping it dead simple. The same with lists. The one thing we've been testing on lists that we found is really weird is double spacing. So if you have a content editor that wants to make the content look spaced out and they decide on your bullet point list, they're just going to hit enter twice. Google disassociates it as being a bullet point list because you've got those 2 line breaks. So instead, if you can just set it as a style that the space is bigger, rather than them having to put in 2 physical line breaks in the HTML, you will find that Google understands that they're connected points because it really does care how it's structured. We found that changing that on one client got them to rank basically like this, obviously not that client. But that's a really simple way of getting better structure, and it's just a training thing with your content editors. And then obviously use structured data. There are a lot of people that have spoken about structured data over the past day and a bit and told you how to do it. There are loads of types, and all of the structured data help you to see this. What I would say for structured data is that it's exactly the same as writing in that point, example, comment structure. It's something we were taught to do at school. We call it signposting. You start every paragraph with like, firstly, secondly, I'm going to talk about. You're giving a signpost to Google as to what you're doing, and that's exactly what structured data is. And that's going to help you get things like these advertising boxes and just more brand awareness. In terms of this is kind of the reason that there's so many searches that don't result in clicks. Because if you were looking for a chocolate cake recipe, that's 4 steps and that's the whole recipe. You might not actually click through. You probably should if you want to make the cake well, but you could just get the answer from the SERP. We measure your percentage ownership of each certain keyword pages. So we'll look at a query like chocolate cake recipe, and we'll say, do we own that answer box and how big is it? How many pixels is it on a various arrangement of screens? And we're like, right, based on that, and then how many organic results do we own, and how many paid results do we own, and do we own the bit on the side? And we will count all the pixels to work out what percentage of pixels we own, because you're never going to get traffic from it. So you can't measure just on traffic. So that's how we kind of show a value to our clients there. And then genuinely put your users first. So is this a good user experience? Yes. Is it good for whatever site that has come from? Probably not, in terms of their SEO person wanting to hit a traffic metric. But because Google puts users first, or says that they do, we should put users first too. And then the other thing that we're looking into is one of Google's studies about time well spent. So Facebook study on time well spent. So Facebook did this thing where they said, actually, being on social media doesn't make us all depressed. There are certain types of interactions on social media that we qualify as time well spent and we feel rewarded by. So we try and measure time well spent on our clients' websites, which might mean that they've managed to book and do something in under a minute, rather than wanting to have a high time on page. It's really difficult to measure. We try and do it through surveys more often than not, or through user testing, because it's hard to do it with any metrics you can get through analytics. So to sum up, there's 4 things we can do. That's moving beyond keywords, simplifying your content, structured data, and generally just putting users first and actually meaning it. So if there's a competitor that does something better than you, let them rank for the thing you're best at. And if you're not best at anything, probably rethink what you're doing. And most importantly, put users first and stop overthinking algorithms.